The world of work is changing rapidly, and in this podcast, we're examining the challenges and possibilities emerging within this change. We're talking about everything from labor market information to how to enable the thinking and doing that leads to better workforce development and employment outcomes. This is the Workforce Collective podcast. Welcome to the Workforce Collective podcast. My name is Kaleb Meeks, and I'm a videographer and content creator at Workforce Collective. In this episode, my colleague Rachel Crane shares about how we're weaving design thinking into our work more and more with great success. Rachel is the Learning and Engagement Lead at Workforce Collective. After earning a master's degree in leadership and gaining real-world experience within several social impact organizations, she is leveraging her knowledge of systems thinking and facilitating social innovation to navigate the complexity within issues like employment equity and workforce sustainability. So, welcome again, Rachel.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by discussing what is design thinking exactly?
Well, we're all design thinkers, Kaleb. So what I mean is we're all designing different processes in our day-to-day lives all the time. So let's take eating breakfast, for example. We're trying to figure out what are we going to eat, and we're thinking about a recipe maybe or what we need to buy. So that's a process we're trying to design, or how are you going to get to work that day? What's your route to work? You're planning that out, right? So that's kind of what I mean by we're all designing all the time. Design thinking offers a systematized approach to that design process, and it's a human-centered approach to innovation. So doing things differently, or better, more efficiently, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that is a great point. Whether you're starting a business or creating something, or like you said, thinking about your breakfast, design has to come into place at some point to bring any kind of idea to life.
Exactly. Yep. And anyone can design services, programs, or products through their own perspective, but good designers understand that we need to actually think about what the end user is what their experience is like, and we have to empathize with that end user, think about what's going to be most beneficial to that customer, and so their experience needs to be central to the design process.
Okay, so you say good designer. What does a designer need to qualify as a good designer?
Oh, well, I guess that's kind of subjective. That's maybe my own thinking of just being in, anything from, so I'm a teacher also by trade. I teach at Niagara College part-time, and I've been a consumer or an end user of different educational programs. And so I've been in, classrooms that are poorly designed, and I didn't feel like I really walked away learning a lot, or I've been in ones that are really amazingly designed, and it's like a curated, well thought out, intentional learning environment and process that really led me to better outcomes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had that experience where whether you like you're holding something or you enter somewhere or something, you can say this was really well designed. What are some of like the core principles that somebody has to consider?
Yeah, so I touched on a little bit. I say empathy, so being able to understand, or people say walk a day in that person's shoes, in that customer end user's shoes, understand what their wants, needs, pain points are, and you're trying to design something right that's going to help them in some way. Iteration is another pretty core principle. So to be able to say I designed something, but once I test it out with that user or customer, I'm ready to get that feedback if it really worked for them or not, and then change it. And it's called iterate the process or change the product in some way. Creative confidence as well. This is something that we develop in actually going out and experimenting. Experimentation is a big part of the design thinking process. So willing to take risks and actually explore different possibilities and test and prototype. And then with that comes embracing ambiguity, because when you do an experiment, you really don't know the outcome until it comes. So we have to embrace the unknown or ambiguous, and also be prepared to fail and be optimistic. I've heard some people say that design thinkers are pissed off optimists.
And that's a good point, because a lot of people, I figure anybody that's designing anything would want to design something great, but you can't be afraid of the failures. Through trial and error comes these great things.
Yeah. And I do believe, humans, we get comfortable and sometimes a little lazy. So sometimes we we just fall through the same old, or what's called status quo, and we just kind of design these systems, processes, products, again, without that much like kind of spirit of innovation or willingness to try new things and experiment and fail. It's just, life is hard. Sometimes it's just we want to be able to have something that we know, and we don't really want to think outside the box too much, and that's okay. But design thinking really does encourage us to get outside that box, away from status quo, and try things different in order to solve some pretty complex problems.
I like that. So how exactly did design thinking even begin? I know we're all design thinking, but when did it become realized as a process?
Yeah, and like the term design thinking is something that's been invented recently. I'd say I think it's the past 30 years. Design thinking was coined by a firm called IDEO a few decades ago, and human-centered design was made more famous by a great academic institution called Stanford University's D School. I've been lucky enough to learn and study with D School a little bit, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation really brought it into areas like international development. So they've kind of, between those three, they've made design thinking kind of famous at this point. But the roots of human-centered design trace all the way back to like the first civilization. So some say Plato's Republic, for example, because it was really common to seek advice from the community and kind of that democratic process. So to really engage, design thinking also engages stakeholders. So people who are experiencing the problems are, like I said, customers or end users in the brainstorming ideation process. So Plato's Republic, if you think about that civilization, they were doing that, and the democratic process was born. And then I've also been with local indigenous knowledge keepers who say, obviously, like in their early civilizations as well, they've kind of had the democratic process. It's been pretty foundational to the culture. So you could say that it's the style of collaboration that really led for these developed harmonious societies. And also this thing we call design thinking, the same kind of principles.
Yeah, so 30 years, that would be like a fairly new process, but the actual human-centered design, that's really not new at all. I know from my understanding of Indigenous culture, there's always been a community voice rather than a one leader decides all. So that really does make a lot of sense.
Yep, it's something that when I'm out there facilitating these methods, something I like to remind people of. It's a really intuitive experience. We know this. We're very social, emotional beings. We're very interconnected. So it's just a matter of sometimes of reminding us that no one really operates in a silo. We're always working together, and we need to work together more and do it a little bit more intentionally. But yeah, a lot of people already intuitively know this, right? So there are other ways, other ways that human-centered design, that kind of thinking and doing, is akin to Indigenous ways of knowing as well. So for example, context really matters, right? My understanding is context, the natural environment really matters in Indigenous culture, and working with the land, and stewarding and having a relationship there. Context and where we actually are in the environment that we're in matters in human-centered design as well as the humans who are experiencing the problem. It's saying that it's believing that they know best how to work in that environment from their lived and inherited experience. So how to work with the humans in the environment is really important to good design.
Yeah. I agree with that. In the Empower class where I met you, that's what we're trying to teach new generations about, like integration of traditional Indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge, TIK or TEK, to better new developments and communities, rather than just like old ways of ignoring the impacts of things like development. We learned a lot about that, especially in our environmental class.
Beautiful. Well, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. So I mentioned the Gates Foundation before. When they do international development, they've been known to engage with people in the communities where they're aiming to build solutions with. They didn't always start that way. They started in as kind of, or like a lot of international development organizations or people in general who are doing international development, they'll come in with their point of view. So in this case, it was that American point of view coming into a community, let's say in Northern Africa, where they don't live there and they don't have that context of what it's like to live there. So they're coming into a community that isn't theirs, and they're imposing what they think would work in their own community. And they realized time and time again that wasn't working. It wasn't leading to sustainable efforts when they were trying to develop that area and to support that community. It wasn't working as well. So they decided to integrate this design thinking approach instead, human-centered design, and they had better outcomes.
Yeah, I think this way of inclusive thinking, it allows for much more sustainability for our world and all of our people, not just community wellness. Yeah. And how did you start applying design thinking in your work?
It's a long story. The long story short, I guess I've always been curious in some way about entrepreneurs and leaders. Like, I just think that those are the change makers, right? They're coming up with new ideas and actually wanting to see it through to fruition and to realization. So I began studying business and entrepreneurship and then leadership in my master's program, like you already mentioned. In my master's program, I came across design thinking and had to do an organizational leadership project, which I did at my place of work at the time, which was Niagara College. And I did some participatory action research, and I engaged, I was then studying millennials and emerging generations to see if they were well suited to lead entrepreneurial culture shift. So some big words there, but essentially I was trying to draw some parallels between what my generation grew up with and kind of our ethos, and see if we were well suited to lead big shifts in the organization in general.
So you've had quite the journey. There's a lot to unpack there, but one thing I heard you say was entrepreneurship culture. Can you explain what entrepreneurship means?
Yeah, because some people are familiar with entrepreneurship, which is essentially it's launching a new idea into action, and usually with a business process. So you're concerned about sustaining it through revenue or money, making money in order to make that product or service continue, right, and sustain. So entrepreneurship is doing the same thing, but it's within an organization. So it's not necessarily that you're out like on your own as a solo entrepreneur or building your own business. You're doing it within the business or your place of work already that's already existing.
Okay. Would that kind of be like similar to what some of the youth are doing here at Workforce Collective?
Totally. Yep. Our exactly. Yeah, it's a really good point. Our organization is very entrepreneurial. So if any one of us has an idea of a project or research interest, then we can bring it to the forefront, and then we look for funding or resources and ways to make that a viable research project, and then hopefully we can create some solutions and start to figure out some ways to address those workforce issues that we're curious about.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for explaining that. So let me let you get back to just how you began design thinking in your career.
Oh.
Yeah. Kind of drifted off a little bit.
Yeah. What else can I say? Just within that research project, I really did see that, I was starting to introduce human-centered design methods to my colleagues through that. Again, it was a project that I had to do for school, but then the word started to spread, really. So I had other professors asking, like, what are you doing over there? Can you teach me what you're doing? I want to start teaching students. I started to learn more about the business model canvas, which is one of the tools that we use in human-centered design or design thinking. So people started to invite me in to just share more about these tools like the business model canvas, and start to facilitate some problem solving and change endeavors.
So is that where you design? Is that where you began the design part of the design labs?
I guess that was like an early form of a design lab, yeah. But it's really taken off in our work right now. Like we have a project right now within immigrant employment where we have small to medium-sized businesses that come in, and they have their challenge is labor shortages. And they know that there's a lot of newcomers and immigrants coming in to settle into our region, and they want to attract and retain that immigrant and newcomer talent. So they have a challenge right now of trying to connect in with newcomer talent. And so we really throughout the past year, we've been having a series of design labs with a small group of small, medium-sized businesses to figure out how might we design solutions to help them attract and retain newcomers.
Okay, so what is a design lab?
Yeah.
How does one work?
Right. So in a design lab, we usually have food. So we usually start with breaking bread. It's really important. We think we really place care at the center of what we do. So we try to create an environment where people are, first of all, taken care of. We have full bellies. And then we come together to actually design those questions. Like, what do we want to look into in the beginning? So it's how might we is actually a tool used. It's a how might we question. So how might we solve for labor shortages? So we start with that question. What our team does really well is, we've been creating these brief reports around getting some more data so we can really understand the problem. It's like a pretty big problem statement, really, 2-pager. And then we understand the problem that we're trying to solve for. So we present the information in that brief. And then we go to town with all kinds of different tools like Post-it notes or whiteboard walls, or we play with Play-Doh sometimes and do systems maps. Yeah, there's like hundreds of different tools you can use to get people talking about the system that we're working in, first of all, and that we're trying to innovate within. And then all the while people are building relationships, right, or strengthening relationships. They're getting to know each other. And then we go to that brainstorming phase. So how can we, whoever's in the room together, start to figure out solutions to the problems. And then the next stage after that is the follow-up. So when people leave that really exciting, engaging session, it's kind of like a workshop, but it's usually 2 to 3 hours. So once they have this high energy session and they leave and we all go back to our regular everyday, the follow-up is really important for our team. So what our team can do is start to look for resources to start to actually prototype or experiment with the solutions that the design lab that were created in the design lab.
That's great. I feel like that kind of gives an image of the collective part of our name. Not just the planning, because people want to know what did we do this for, right? Mm-hmm. So the follow up, that's great. What are some examples of design labs that you've been part of, and how did they come about using those steps?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Engaging SMEs project. That's with the attracting small to medium-sized organizations, attracting immigrant talent. That's one we've had existing for about a year now. The last one we did, we're starting to investigate more into the care economy. So the care economy workforce. So that's everything from education to health care and health services to social services. And we started with the early learning and childcare workforce because it's in crisis. We really desperately need a better childcare system and workers within that system. They're typically underpaid. So, and that's a big reason why there's a lot of labor shortages. And that's why we started with that design, like understanding that problem. Why are they paid so low and what could be done about it? What has been done? So we presented a brief, and then we did recently a design lab around that. And we want to, and it was very successful, lots of great leaders in the room and people who are really ready to move on the issue and take action. We're hoping to do something similar within the nonprofit sector, nonprofit and charitable workforce sector, and then healthcare as well, immigrant deployment in a different way. We'll do that with other more diverse stakeholders as well involved in that one. And we're even going to try and tackle some what's called wicked problems like poverty reduction, and how is that interconnected with employment and other factors. Well-being in work, diversity and equity inclusion in complex systems like education. Some pretty big, hairy, complex problems that we believe really need to dedicate some energy towards solving.
So let me ask you, what was the outcome of that design lab? Did it have an influence on the issue that you were tackling, and how did it influence you?
Which ones? Like any one of them I mentioned, or?
Yeah, what was the first one you mentioned? Healthcare.
Well, that's upcoming. So the first one we did was the early learning and childcare one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't think yet you weren't there for that one. A lot of other members of our team were, but we can't all be at everyone all the time. So unfortunately you weren't there. So I'll catch you up. Yeah, I'll catch you up. So yeah, we had that great day, and then relationships were made. So kind of like within hours after, I saw a flurry of emails from people connecting, being like, okay, I'm aware of this project going on. Can I get your support? Can we have a meeting about this? So already there's that connection and people meeting in that room and then figuring out, can we collaborate on these other projects that we have related to the issue of attracting and retaining childcare, early learning and childcare talent. And then we were also invited to speak at an economic developers conference. I was there earlier this week, talking really for the first time about the care economy to a group of economic developers all over Canada, or all over Ontario. That was the Ontario one. So across the province, just really how can we understand early learning and childcare as a really essential infrastructure. So we talk a lot about like roads and buildings as being key infrastructure. That is, and so are care economy services. Like if we don't have healthy people, right? If we don't have educated people, if we don't have people who are taken care of socially, then we don't have an economy. So it was pretty impactful to be invited to that event.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that all came from this initiative. And like we've only been doing, the brief to the design lab was like a 2-month kind of time span. So it's pretty what's happening already. We're again exploring some different projects to get some money and start to experiment and resource some of these ideas and solutions that came from that day.
That's awesome. So let me just backtrack a second. You said wicked problems earlier. What would be a textbook definition of a wicked problem?
Ooh, that's really challenging me now. Okay, one that has like no clear solution, and sometimes it's contradictory, or there's changing elements or requirements all the time to the problem. So something like poverty is obviously very complex. It doesn't just, someone doesn't fall under the poverty line just in one decision or one
Just
step,
because.
right? There's many factors that are leading for that individual to be living in poverty. So, yep, that would be an example of a wicked problem, and yeah, the kind of definition I would say.
Yeah, there's definitely a level of complexity to changing or like contradictory issues. What's an example of well, you said an example of a wicked problem, poverty.
Yeah. And I guess I'll say a little bit more too about how design thinking, like why that would be used for a wicked problem, is really because there's no one clear event that led to the problem to occur. There's no one clear solution. It's very complex. So we need those collaborative, adaptable, and really different ways of problem solving to address the complexities of the problem, the behavior.
So about design labs again, how do people attend? How do people end up in a design lab? And how can people tap into design thinking?
So first of all, I'll say there's lots of resources out there that are very accessible. IDEO, the organization I referenced before, has the field guide for human-centered design. It's free. It's like 100 pages long, and it's got step-by-step how to facilitate these different meetings and different methods and tools that you'd have in those meetings. That's free and online. I believe it's just on their website. I think we can do show notes in the podcast. We will figure that out. Okay.
We'll figure it.
Yeah. And so we can put those in the show notes. I've always wanted to say that. And so that's one way that is open, accessible resource for anyone interested. And how do people attend our design labs? That's a question we sometimes get asked. So right now, we're very well connected in the community, and so we reach out through other networks of like business organizations or nonprofit organizations, and through our own Rolodex or list of contacts. And we do invite, and we try to be again as diverse in our invitations as possible. So we do have many ways of reaching out to people. But if anyone's interested, I would say there's a lot of organizations and people that we don't know, of course. We can't know everyone. So if anyone's listening and wants to get involved in any of our current work, please reach out. You can contact me personally, Rachel at workforcecollective.ca, or find us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Well, that's great, Rachel. Thank you for talking today about design thinking and just giving us a better understanding of what it is and what exactly is a design lab.
Happy to. Lots of fun.
Great. So if you want to know more about the topics that we discussed today, you can check out our website at workforcecollective.ca or connect with us through Twitter and LinkedIn. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and anywhere else you get your podcast content for more fantastic discussions like this. Thanks for being here.